As the name suggests, asset operation is just that. Whether you're operating an asset to support a service, operating an asset to support a product of some type. So operating assets, we want to do that within their design and service limits. I've seen many a time, even processing plants, they get a bit desperate against commodity prices, wind up the plant to the full extent in which it was designed, only to end in failure. We need to make sure in operating assets we do it legally, safely, mindful of the environment and reliability requirements. Developing operational strategies and plans and procedures. If I take this back to the strategic asset management plan, I might come up with a concept of operations which helps inform me that my asset operations may be seasonal, and therefore that can be an input and an output to my strategic asset management plan. Providing data and feedback from operations to improve performance, that plan, do, check and act perspective, but also ensuring operations support that sustainability and longer term value, whatever that means for your organization. Depending on the industry I'm in, it may be assumed that someone actually knows how to operate a particular asset or piece of equipment. A car, a train, a ferry, a boat, are great examples of those with good regulation around them. But if we don't understand or are trained, for instance, if I'm in a processing plant converting, say, raw materials to something of output, I could do more damage than good quite simply just by not understanding what it is I'm doing and the environment and the context in which I'm working within. So when we don't understand, we're not made aware, and we're not following operational procedures, we're opening up the organization and ourselves to great risk. So we can simply provide training, simulations, but reinforcing safe, effective, and even secure operations. I think too, operator awareness and training should also be provided to maintainers, because if maintenance also understand how things are operated, it also provides them a little bit more due diligence and care during maintenance. We would like to think that all of our operators are doing so in accordance with procedures. But compliance isn't just to legislation, isn't just to regulation. It's compliance to what the organisation will set as a standard for people to operate machinery and equipment by. So there's a real risk here that sometimes operations may feel the need to cut corners on safety, environment, or even regulations to meet the throughput of a process or to deliver something for an external stakeholder. We need to combat that by reinforcing compliance is non-negotiable. We can do that through leadership, top management, KPIs, etc. But in order for this pressure to be taken off operators, the organisation as a whole needs to really empower and enable and support the organisation to support operations, because that is where value is realised. When we talk about operating assets, I think when they're being operated in single by someone or a small team, there's not so much of an issue, especially if they're trained. But when it comes to actually maybe handing over at the end of a shift to the new operator, bringing maintenance in, whether that's just spot maintenance or heavy maintenance in, or even engineering, we have the real risk that we can misalign actions, which therefore can actually set that asset up for failure. We need to make sure we have structured communication, working within a framework, but also feedback loops within functions. I've seen some real, unfortunately, safety significant or safety critical incidents in shutdowns where you've got pressure, you've got heat, and you've got gas all mixed in together, not mixed in together, but metaphorically speaking, that we need to make sure without the communication, there's some real safety significant things that can occur. So communication between teams, many of us would be familiar with toolbox meetings. Do not underestimate it and do not bypass. Communication is everything. There are many reasons why people may resist a new operating procedure or practice. It could be a new type of machinery, could be a new manager, whatever the reason. But we do run a risk that staff resist adopting new technologies. They don't buy into using a particular procedure, or maybe it's around sustainability requirements. What we need to do is involve the operator early, engage with them early, listen to them, demonstrate the benefits to the organisation, if possible, share the benefits back to them in terms of the changes, but also providing hands-on demonstration. All too often, I see we assume that operations know what the intention of management is, and all of a sudden, they're left out in the wilderness saying, well, what do I do now? Reminder: operations is where we translate all the work of the organization into services or products, which it might be revenue, but at least value to our stakeholders. Making sure that the operator is set up for success is everything. There's a real risk in an operational context that decisions are made to appease short-term pressures, and they may be to deliver something to a customer, achieving an end-of-month P&L goal, whatever it might be. But when you weigh that up against the long-term value of the asset or the production line as a whole, we need to be mindful that if we're going to make a decision that should actually place that asset at risk of performing in the future, it needs to be understood. Now, while we might talk about educating teams on the life cycle impacts, we need to go back to top management and remind them that when you want to change the functional configuration of a network or a production line, etc., you need to understand what the ramifications may be on the assets that support that, including the people for that matter. So again, understanding the life cycle impacts versus the initiatives, but also aligning it to long-term goals, i.e. coming back to your goals that your strategic asset management plan articulates as asset management objectives. Just as integrated reliability relies upon data quantitatively, so does the organization learning from operations. So the operation data may be collected. It might be done automatically through SCADA, whatever it might be, work orders, production, throughput, etc. But what happens is it's collected, but doesn't go anywhere. It's not used to improve or to understand current practices and process. So what we need to do is build a culture of continuous improvement. If we've got information and data there, let's use it to provide improvements for the operator, the assets, non-physical assets, and of course the services and the products that our external stakeholders receive by way of value. So when it comes to asset operations, very much we're coming back to section 8.1 of ISO 55001, and that is around or centered around operational planning and control, including lifecycle management. I've said it before, we also need to take a leadership perspective here and remind ourselves that without operations, we will not be delivering value to our stakeholders. So asset operation is about making sure assets are used properly so they deliver the required service safely and sustainably. Again, if my organization is around driving vehicles from point A to point B, well, asset operation will be pretty safe. But if I've got someone out there working on a large processing plant, discreetly looking at one particular asset or operating it in isolation of a big system of assets, that's a different context, and you really need to be assured that everyone is trained and there is a feedback loop in place for improvement.